Hey guys, Chop here. Celestia had ordered the 7 Archons 500 years ago to destroy Khaenri'ah, as well as inflicting a curse upon the people of the godless nation in the Cataclysm. But why did they do it? The Archons don't exactly seem evil, although Celestia is ambiguous at best. So what did Khaenri'ah possibly do to deserve such a horrible fate, especially compared to the other civilizations that Celestia has destroyed using the celestial nails? Well, I think I found a pretty good lead that we can use to theorize on the matter. Genshin Impact is relatively unoriginal. They love to base their stories and lore on tales from various cultures around the real-life world. It's like how a lot of Teyvat's history is based on Gnostic stories, Inazuman tales based on Japanese myths or history, Mondstadt and Germanic stories, etc, etc. So, what is Khaenri'ah's stories based on? Quite simply, Norse. The names of all the people are Nordic, with people like Alberich, Rheindotter, Halfdan, etc. Interestingly enough though, Irmin, the king of Khaenri'ah, isn't actually a Norse name. Its origins are Germanic, although in Old Norse it does translate to one of the many alternative names for Odin, the highest god in Norse mythology. The literal meaning of Irmin is just great, so King Irmin is basically just King Great, and Irminsul is just Great Pillar. I should quickly note now, before I go any further, just how little our understanding is of the Old Norse people. They did not leave us much of their history, and so there are many different interpretations of the same thing, such as some people believe in Irmin to be the former name of Tyr, the god of justice and war. So, what interpretation Hoya decided to go with is up in the air, considering we know very little about him. My initial bet though would be Odin, considering he is King Irmin and had only one eye. Anyway, with Khaenri'ah being based on Norse culture, we can take a look at their stories to try and find out what the Cataclysm in Genshin Impact is based on more specifically, in order to get some extra details that they haven't yet told us. Again, there are very little records on this ancient culture, and even less of it is written down by their people. I've been reading the Poetic Edda recently, which is one of the most important, if not the most important, book that teaches us about the Norse mythology and some of their tales. There is one I found that has clearly been referenced by Genshin for Khaenri'ah, and therefore quite possibly the Cataclysm itself. The most immediate references are the names Rheingold, Alberich, and Siegfried, which may not be immediately obvious what that reference is, but don't worry, I'll get to it. I'm going to go through the names to begin with, and then tell you the story that all of these characters feature in, and what that means for why Khaenri'ah was destroyed. Firstly, Alberich is a character we found to be introduced in the 3.5 Archon quest, Khaenri'ah, which has finally given me the confirmation I needed to believe this story as the basis of Khaenri'ah. Clothar Alberich is the founder of the Abyss Order, although the name Clothar has no reference in the tale. I did a little bit of digging though, and found that Clothar was a king of the Franks well over 1,000 years ago. At the time of his reign, the region did extend into more Nordic territory, such as the River Rhine. If you have any suspicions about this being where Clothar was referenced from, the real-life equivalent also had a kid called Charibert. Obviously, with Genshin's Clothar having a son named Khaenri'ah, you can see where this is where they got their naming scheme from. That isn't just out of nowhere, by the way. Clothar's dad in real life was half-brothers with, you'll never guess, a guy named Irminfrid. That is too good of a connection to believe it a mere coincidence. What about Rheingold though? There is no Rheingold in Genshin Impact after all, only Rheindotter. Well, the name translates to the daughter of Rhine, which is from the River Rhine that Clothar's empire encompassed. What's way more telling though, is that Rheindotter is nicknamed Gold, so Rheingold is almost certainly the basis for the name Rheindotter. Lastly, we have Siegfried, a character from the story. There isn't actually anybody from Genshin Impact called Siegfried though. He's from the sister game, Honkai. In Kiana Kazlana's character introduction, her father is the current patriarch of the Kazlana family, and that father is of course Siegfried. This is a connection I randomly stumbled across whilst researching for this video, and with the help of some of your comments for the Honkai aspect of it, because I've actually never played the game myself. Although, how does this actually relate to Genshin Impact? Well, the character introduction for the Traveller Twins when the game first launched had a quote by the initial KK. The most widely accepted theory is that KK is Kiana or Kevin Kazlana. This probably only boosts that theory even more, considering that we now have an even deeper connection. Okay, so that's all of the characters referenced, but what is the actual story that they feature in? The Norse story that seems to be some basis for the Cataclysm is Nibelungen. The biggest issue with me using this as a basis, however, is similar to the issue with Irmin's name. There's a lot of different accounts of this. I read it originally from the earliest written account of it, but it was an oral tale that has since been adapted to the more popular The Ring of the Nibelung by Richard Wagner. The premise is somewhat the same, but also quite different too, so I'll give you both accounts, then you can make your own decision. Firstly, the Poetic Edda version. In this story, Nibelungs are dwarfs that mine in a subterranean realm, most likely referring to the realm of darkness, Niflheim. They mine a great many riches, including a treasure called the Rheingold. One dwarf in particular was tasked with guarding it, and that dwarf was our beloved Alberich. Alberich had cursed a ring that was a part of this treasure before it was stolen by the gods, meaning that the gods had stolen a treasure from the underground realm of darkness that was cursed by the people. I'm sure you can see some similarities in that alone. The alternate version is Das Rheingold by Richard Wagner, where Alberich is not guarding the treasure, but instead trying to seduce 3 Rhine maidens that guard it. I wish I was there for my boy Alberich to wingman him and spit some riz on the Rhine maidens, but unfortunately I was fixing my hair up in the bathroom and was just over 1,000 years too late. So they don't fall for this immaculate game and he decides to set his eyes instead on the Rheingold. It's a treasure that could be made into a ring where the bearer holds the power to rule the world so long as they renounce love. Juice WRLD hadn't released any music yet. To be fair to Alberich, renouncing love to the world was kind of the only option. So he takes the treasure and gives it to his brother Mime, who he forces to make the ring for him. He also forces his brother to make him a magic helmet that is able to turn him invisible or transform into various forms. A couple gods come down and are like, "Yo, my slime, Alberich, let's just say, hypothetically, of course, someone wants to steal your helmet and ring in your sleep. How would you stop them?" And of course he's like, "Oh, you silly so-and-so, I'll just transform into something small so they'll never see me. I usually just transform into a giant snake, which isn't suspiciously linked to anything Genshin-wise, such as the serpent in the Gnostic Chorus or Dainsleif's snake constellation at all." Which seems kind of meta and out of character, and gods pick up on it and tell him he's crazy and should totally turn into a frog to prove he's not. So he does, and the gods just grab him and steal the ring and helmet. This kind of annoys Alberich, understandably, because he thought they were homies, so this is where he then decides to curse the ring in this version of the tale. Specifically, the curse laid upon the ring is one that inspires jealousy in the bearer and envy in those who do not bear it until it returns to him. And yes, jealousy and envy are different. So all of the crazy girls who say they're jealous when other girls look or talk to your boyfriend or something, they're wrong. You're not jealous because he's yours. You're envious, and you should totally give me your number. Not because that's my type or anything, just so I can keep telling you you're wrong. Yeah. Anyway, that's the main gist of the story. Siegfried comes into the story later on when a bunch of other stuff happens to the treasure and he eventually claims it. But it's not particularly relevant to the theory I'm about to suggest to you. So I'm sure you can see where all of the connections are from that story into Genshin. Niflheim is obviously Khaenri'ah, the realm of darkness beneath the world. There's curses, gods sticking their noses in for selfish gain as they often did in Norse mythology, snakes, you get the point. This story to me is the most likely candidate for the basis of the Cataclysm event. I believe that Khaenri'ah had a treasure that the celestial gods wanted, but they didn't want to give it up. So the gods went and stole it, and in receiving a cursed item, cursed them back. Alternatively, maybe the item was already cursed with that jealousy and envy, so the celestial gods were envious because of that and went to war unwillingly from their own consciousness. Or maybe they had an item they weren't supposed to. What was this item though? Well, with the treasure in the story being Rheingold, I imagine it has something to do with Rheindotter, but there's just one problem. She doesn't seem evil. I mean, she raised Albedo and hung out with the other mages who seemed quite nice mostly. I mean, Nicole, Alice, the old hag, would they really be working with somebody who's up to no good? No. Let's compare more to the Ride Maidens, somebody who had the treasure, but it was taken from. Alberich took it in this story, but I don't think Clothar did in Genshin. He doesn't seem to really understand why the Cataclysm occurred, so I'm going to rule him out with some fair confidence. Other than him, the only real contender, other than somebody we don't know, is King Irmin. And now that makes a lot more sense, because Odin is the god who took it in the story, so maybe his Genshin equivalent also took it. Rheindotter created something with her Khaenri'ah, and King Irmin decided to take it from her. But then what did he do with it? Does he have a brother to make it into this powerful item? This one's going to be a little bit of a stretch, but I can certainly see the connection here and it is a decent possibility. What if the Jester had a hand in this. See, in the Nibelungen tale, Mime was the one who was forced against his will to create the ring and helmet. Mime was the brother of Alberich, and so obviously quite close to the owner of the treasure, and one of the closest people to the king would be his royal mage, the jester. Mime, jester, not the most dissimilar of professions? Perhaps he was forced to do something with his treasure that eventually led to Celestia coming down on them, which is why he is so personally motivated to take them down. It's not a particularly vital part of the theory, it's just almost a throwaway detail that could lead into some bigger theories down the road. So, King Irmin had a treasure and the celestial gods wanted to confiscate it, and I suppose he refused, which led to the downfall of Khaenri'ah. It was nobody else's fault in the nation, but if you're going to punish a king, the most effective way is probably by destroying his nation. Still not convinced? Well, I have something a little more to add that you might find interesting. Inside the giant rune golem in Sumeru, there's a mysterious chronicle that mentions the Knight Marshal and Fortis. This knight lost his left eye, which is a very odd detail. We see a lot of Khaenri'ahs rocking the eyeless right eye fashion statement with the likes of Kaya, Piero, Dainsleif, but the only person who lacks a left eye is King Irmin. Now, because of this lacking a left eye, if we just entertain the possibility that the knight in Fortis is Irmin in his youth, then we can get to a very similar conclusion that we got to in our theory thus far. And Fortis is not a Nordic name, but in fact the name of the wounded Fisher King. The Fisher King is a king like Irmin, and is the lord and guard of the Holy Grail. He is the last in a long line of kings with this task. Unfortunately, he is wounded, which leaves him infertile and his kingdom barren. Who else do we know about without a left eye that is the last in a long line of kings that is left wounded and with a barren nation? The connections are connecting. King Irmin is the knight and Fortis, and they are both protecting the Holy Grail. The reason for the Cataclysm and the destruction of Khaenri'ah. What is the Holy Grail, I hear you asking? It's somewhat unknown precisely, but generally it is an item like a cup or a stone that gives you eternal youth and holds magical healing powers. Well, Celestia certainly made sure that Khaenri'ahs were eternal, just not in the way they wanted, I'm sure. Given the two stories this seems to be based on, it's hard to ignore the evidence for this theory. There are two strong cases that both confirm something extremely similar. Ultimately, King Irmin had something that Celestia wanted or didn't want them to have. With so many characters having similar names to those involved with Khaenri'ah and so many other similarities, I think this theory holds real merit. I do also think that we can connect the snake in the Nibelungen story to either the serpent in the Gnostic chorus or Dainsleif's constellation. I'm just not exactly sure how yet. If you have any theories on that or comments in general about the whole thing, then please leave them below. I've thoroughly enjoyed going through the many I've had recently, and it'll be fun to go through even more. I'm still going to continue my Genshin Theory series with some even more crazy speculations and evidence that has not yet been discussed in the community. So if it interests you at all, then stick around. Until then, however, chop out. Bye.